Over the past year on this channel, I've been doing so much stuff with the 0.50 build of Dead Rising, and for a good reason. It's an awesome build, and it's the earliest one I own, and has the most interesting things in it to make a video on, so of course, that one got most of the spotlight. But 0.50 isn't the only build of Dead Rising that I own. I have others that might not be as amazingly early as 0.50, but they still are a part of Dead Rising's history. And there's one build in particular that I've been meaning to make videos on this whole time, and now it's finally time I start showing it. 0.70. For today's video, we're going to talk about all the weird quirks and differences that are present in the 0.70 build, and oh man, there's a lot. Now of course, if you want a true analysis on the beta and every single one out there, I highly suggest checking out the beta archive on the forum. But anyways, let's get started. When the game launches, you immediately start to notice some differences. First of all, it does the globe loading screen for every scene transition. And next, we see that it has an unrated ESRB message, so it kinda tells you just how early this build is. Now, just like the build before, when this beta loads up, the first thing it does is automatically play the Connie and Dakota scene, which is still fairly early. The most noticeable change is it doesn't say Dead Rising at the beginning, but other than that, it's just lighting differences, so let's move on. Alright, so now that we're in the main menu, let's just get it out of the way first. Frank West is standing in the parking lot. Why? I don't know. What's funny is that you can actually see this in the official trailer of the game, so this build is likely the same exact build used to record that trailer, or at least it's very similar. Now the selector icon isn't a bloody hand in this build, but rather it's this weird gradient thing, and this actually kept being used even till E3 2006. So if we start a new fresh game save, overtime mode and infinity mode are just unlocked by default. I don't know why. So I skipped ahead to the helicopter photo section because in here there's quite a few differences. First of all, just like the official trailer, the camera zoom icon goes above the bar when you zoom into the max. So there's further proof this build is pretty much the same. I should also note that the buttons to operate the camera are still really unfinished. The photo counter doesn't show up for some reason, but the flash icon does, which we'll be seeing more of later on. We can see different survivors being attacked in this scene. I'm not sure why they were later changed, but in the beta, Aaron was being attacked on the car, not this dude. Same goes for the lady on the roof, just a random NPC swap. I'm not sure why it was needed. Alright, so once we're actually in the game, even more differences start to show up, as you would imagine. First of all, while being level 1, Frank had 5 blocks of health, which I mentioned in a previous video, but it's worth mentioning here. The pause menu is insanely different, and more so it's unfinished. The background is just blindingly blue, and it just says Dead Rising at the top. Apparently they needed to remind you what game you were playing. Amazingly, the beta had a feature to return to the title screen, something we later saw in the HD Next Gen release, which is awesome, but the 360 final game just never got that. They cut it out after 0.70 and just stopped using it. Again, like the intro scene, the flash icon makes a return in game, and it actually still has a purpose, because in the 0.50 build, the camera would literally flash when you took a picture, and while it's harder to see in 0.70, it still does it. Also, something that's interesting is that you spawn with 34 images. I'm not sure why the extra 4 was needed. And it also has a 0 in front of the 2 changing numbers, just like all the earlier builds. Saving is still a very early feature, and it actually works the same exact way as 0.50, where instead of opening the guide menu, it does all of it in this tiny little box thing. So since I already made a video on it, I'm not going to focus on this change, but again, here we can see Frank with his very different facial expressions. They look so much better. The collision in the security room is very unfinished, which can cause some pretty unflattering glitches. so I'm glad they fixed most of these in the final game, but since it's early, it also allows us to stand and be in a lot of interesting places, such as the bed and the saving bench. But pretty much every stage has weird unfinished collision, which causes a lot of glitches. Something pretty cool that you can do in almost all of the beta builds is perform the over-the-shoulder viewing camera in literally any area you want at any point in the game. I'm not sure why they disabled this, but in the final game it's just not possible. So moving on, the entire intro section of Entrance Plaza is fairly unfinished. The survivors don't even have their names on top of their heads for some reason, and you could actually walk into them and move them all over the place. I just find this hilarious. But for some strange reason, after we talk to Barnaby, the survivors are completely missing. They don't show up anywhere when the zombies enter the mall. So, skipping ahead a bit, when we get into the warehouse at the top floor, it originally had a door here, which makes total sense because in the final game the door's frame is still here. They just removed the door, pointlessly. Even in E3 2006, the door is still here, so they removed it pretty much last minute. The chime or song that plays when Otis calls you is a totally different sound from the final game. In fact, 0.50, 0.70, and the final game all have their own 3 different chimes. So let's take a listen. So of course, while this isn't exactly a beta difference, it's worth noting that this build does have the same debug menu that we saw in 0.50, and this one actually has a few extra options compared to the last build. Something cool that you can do in this one is view the build date from within the menu, since the main menu doesn't say it like 0.50 did. Most of this build is still unfinished and unplayable, so whenever you encounter a cutscene that is still in development, it will simply tell you that it cannot be shown, and it will only display this text on a black or gray background. Most water in this build, such as the various ponds, simply do not exist. The park's lake is completely dry, and so is the pond near the food court. Paradise Plaza also has very little water, however it still makes these splash effects when you walk in it. Whenever you go through a loading screen, the game will show you how many days you have survived for and the time of which you've been at the mall, and in the final game it's actually counting down till the helicopter arrives, which makes a bit more sense, so thankfully they changed that. And finally, this build does have Infinity Mode, however, it's extremely early. While it still works like it does in the final game, it's extremely bugged and prone to crashes for just about everything you do in here. Something funny I noticed is that if you enable God Mode, the health still pulses. Clearly they didn't plan for that. So there we go. Of course there are so many other differences, but that's all the time we have for today's video. If you want to check out all the differences in this build, as well as all the other betas of Dead Rising, I highly recommend checking out the Dead Rising beta archive on the forum. But with that, thanks for watching, and as always, subscribe for more.